Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a Young Scholars on Turkey event on social media and digital public sphere in Turkey. We have with us Courtney Darrow. She's doing her graduate studies, PhD studies at University of Arizona. She'll be talking to us about the role of social media in Turkey, and we'll try to enlarge that discussion to the Arab Spring and the role of social media, which has been discussed very widely over the past year. Courtney Darrow is currently a Javits Fellow and a PhD student in the Department of Middle East and North African Studies at the University of Arizona. She focuses on modern Turkey and contemporary issues of Turkish diaspora community in Germany. She also works on media and cultural policy issues in Turkey and Germany. She completed her, after completing her MA, hopefully finished it soon. She spent a year as a research fellow at the Max Planck Institute of Economics in Vienna, Germany, and we will be talking about. She has a case study of YouTube ban in Turkey, and we were having a nice conversation prior to this about how the role of social media comes head to head with national concerns of nation states, and how that interplay is very lively, is discussed in a lively manner over the past year in the context of the Arab Spring. So, without further ado, I'll just turn over the table to the discussion to Courtney, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for welcoming someone from the Sonoran Desert. It's great to be in this metropolis. I'm going to go ahead and read because I feel that's the best way for me to get my point across. But again, I mean this to be in the most informal manner, and I do welcome any questions or interjections you might have during the conversation or after. Nearly all variants of social and political theory hold that the communication system is a cornerstone of modern societies. In political terms, the communication system may serve to enhance democracy or to deny it, or some combination of the two. Less commented upon, though no less significant, the communication system has emerged as a central area for profit-making in modern capitalist societies. This dual role of the communication system, both a fundamental element of the emerging global economy and the bedrock of political democracy, constitutes a vital tension in the world stage. My study aimed to shed light on Turkey's use and banning of YouTube, and to determine if responses were encased in a nation-state debate or transnational, universal, even cosmopolitan argument. Through critical discourse analysis, comment streams from two prominent Turkish online newspapers were evaluated in regards to stories written on the Turkish ban on YouTube. The macro structures involved with the comment streams were evaluated to show the populist reaction to the ban. The medium of YouTube will also be explored. The silencing of YouTube is questioned in regards to media imperialism or lack of freedom of expression, as well as the suppression of a transnational community. It was YouTube that provided the medium in which Turkish and Greek users feuded over online video posts. Old stereotypes were programmed and performed under the auspices of new technologies. A particular video posted by a Greek YouTube user caught the eye of the Turkish government. On this particular video, the founding father of the Turkish Republic, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, was caricatured and pronounced to be homosexual. This was deemed anti-Turkish, and the Turkish government utilized Article 301 of the Turkish Penal Code in order to enforce the banning of YouTube on the grounds of defaming Turkishness. The ban began in Turkey on March 6, 2007, and lasted until October 31st, 2010. This incident brings up the closely related issues of space and place. The individual YouTube user responsible for the posting was not physically present in Turkey when this defamation took place. The Greek user uploaded the video from the nation-state of Greece, and this video was open to all YouTube users. The question then arises, just how far is the reach of Article 301? This case study shows that it goes beyond the physical borders of the Turkish nation-state and prosecutes those involved in the global community, which is new media. It is apparent that in this case, Turkey reappropriated YouTube to fit within nationalistic confines. The reach and the legitimacy of the Turkish national identity in this case study are therefore implicitly questioned. As my study will demonstrate, new communication technologies are constantly playing a role in the definition of national identity. However, in the case of YouTube, transnational communication may in fact fray the borders of the conventional nation-state, producing the kind of anxiety about national identity that caused the Turkish government to enact the ban. This dynamic between transnational globalism and the confines of traditional national identity is best understood as a push and pull dynamic. This inability to allow for freedom of expression is in a way impeding creative growth within Turkey and limiting Turks' interaction with new communication technologies in a transnational public sphere, which are formed online. Arjuna Pavarai argues, and I would agree, that communication is forming faster and morphing traditional social contexts so that the imagined communities of the nation-state are in fact being transformed. This idea exists in stark contrast to the technological determinism of the Frankfurt School. Mediated life and new communication technologies are not the opiate of the masses, and in many ways have a key proponent that transcends national space. Is this a road to a united, globalized society? Or does the constrictive power of nationalism impede this effect? YouTube is privately owned by Google. It was founded in June 2005 by Chad Hurley, Steve Chin, and Jawed Karim, who were all former employees of PayPal. It is a website that allows people to upload, publish, and view online videos. In October 2008, Google bought YouTube for $1.65 billion. This medium is widely used on a global scale. Mark Poster argues that today's global culture is quite different from those that have come before. He insists that we are now dealing with a unique global culture that is highly dependent on highly complex media systems. He shows how new social media is transcending the previously bound borders of the nation-state. His analysis shows how complex our global society is by virtue of its being surrounded by varying powers of media elites and subalterns that require new political theories and practices. The voice of the online audience forms the core of this analysis. The comment threads from two English-language Turkish online newspapers, the Hurriyet Daily News and Economic Review, and Today's Zaman, were analyzed using Tuan Van Dijk's critical discourse analysis, or otherwise known as CDA. And CDA is an approach where macrostructures, or the overarching themes of the posted comments, have been deciphered and evaluated with respect to the issues at hand. This is a qualitative use of CDA. Evaluating the flows associated with national and transnational identity formation. The articles range in date from March 8, 2007 until July 4, 2010. In total, 19 articles were gathered. Out of the 19 articles pertaining to YouTube, 14 were pertaining to the ban on YouTube that had actual comments that I evaluated. In total, 132 comments were analyzed using CDA, These two newspapers were chosen because of their prominence, being two of the most widely read and circulated newspapers within Turkey, as well as being two Turkish newspapers that have English online versions that allow access to an international audience. The goal of this approach is to uncover these structures by paying close attention to the terminologies, overarching concepts, and oftentimes unspoken assumptions that undergird the text's argument or presentation of information. Von Dijk's version of CDA looks at discourse and power in particular and is generally applied to newspaper articles. The comments regarding the ban on YouTube in Turkey were decidedly anti-ban. There were in total only 6 comments that were in support of the ban. The rest of the 126 comments were anti-ban. The macro structures that were found were, in order of strength, rhetoric surrounding the idea of Turkey being, quote, backwards, which had 29 comments, the ban's lack of freedom of expression and suppression of human rights, and the idea of the ban impeding a global civil society. The main macro structure that arose in the comments related to labeling Turkey, its people, or its government as, quote, backwards. The following comments are good indicators of this stream of thought. Turkey is, quote, living in the past. Quote, grow up, Turkey. Quote, I also find the response to the YouTube issue from the Turkish government ignorant and juvenile. Quote, the current government is doing nothing but taking Turkey back to the Dark Ages. Quote, conservative Muslims and government are pushing the nation back into the Dark Ages. End quote. What is important to note here is that this line of comment puts Turkey in the, quote, other position in comparison to the hegemonic notion of a civilized, quote, civilized and therefore superior West. The debate on Turkey entering the European Union was also a macro structure that related in many ways to the comments of Turkey being backwards. Quote, on the one hand, you want to be an integral part of the EU. On the other, you ban websites. Quote, Turkey cannot be part of the EU. Turkey is a Middle Eastern nation, not a European one. Quote, obviously, the Turkish people are not entitled to the same freedoms as we other EU citizens, end quote. These comments mirror accusations commonly made against Turkey in the EU accession process. A stereotype that has been at play in Turkey's attempt to enter the European Union is that it is not, quote, Western enough, and it is somehow less civilized than its European counterparts. In addition, although Turkey's government is secular, its populace is 99% Muslim, a fact that seems significant in the problem Turkey faces assimilating into the EU. This debate, therefore, seems to be following a Saidian Orientalist fashion. Edward Said, in his major work, Orientalism, points to the historical tension that Islamic nations have held with their Christian counterparts. Quote, not for nothing did Islam come to symbolize terror, devastation, the demonic hordes of hated barbarians. For Europe, Islam was a lasting trauma. Until the end of the 17th century, the Ottoman peril lurked alongside Europe to represent the whole of Christian civilization, a constant danger. And in time, European civilization incorporated that peril and its lore, its great events, figures, virtues, and vices, as something woven into the fabric of life, end quote. Said discusses how, quote, the main issue for them, that would be white Orientalists, was preserving the Orient and Islam under the control of the white man, end quote. Specifically directly after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the 1920s. It is therefore important to ask, do the above comments still display the hegemonic whiteness that appropriates the Turk in a subaltern category, otherizing Turkish ideals, religion, and identity in the process? And therefore, does this otherizing detract from or somehow delegitimize the criticisms leveled at Turkey in this process? We may similarly inquire as to whether blocking of freedom of expression really is an issue here, and does the ban in fact amount to a suppression of what should be a human right, freedom of expression? The second most widely commented topic was the lack of freedom of expression, freedom of choice, and freedom of thought implied in the ban. Quote, the danger of being isolated from internet and free flow of information is much more worse than risk of having to see some silly films made by some Greek kids, end quote. In a similar vein, the macrostructure of a transnational or civil society was frequently commented upon. In these threads, the idea of YouTube creating a space for community and perhaps a transnational identity that links people globally was invoked along the lines of a continent cosmopolitan society. This ideal represents a society that would not be based on othering of people, but instead be based on universal norms. As Stephen Vertov, Beck, and Robin Cohen explain, Kant's cosmopolitanism refers to a philosophy that urges us to all be citizens of the world, creating a worldwide community of humanity committed to common values, end quote. Many commenters found precisely these values and their global application to be threatened by the ban. When looking at the importance of accessing YouTube, I suggest that the YouTube community be engaged as a new digital public sphere, as Michael Vanner created the idea surrounding a public sphere that was accessed through reading the same texts. I am proposing that we extend this idea to the digital new media realm and look at how publics are formed through viewing and uploading videos onto YouTube and other video sharing websites. We must look at the global popularity engagement with YouTube and deem this activity and discourse of importance to creating public spheres that reach beyond the borders of an individual's nation state and connect people at a transnational level. Once we can agree that YouTube is a legitimate digital public sphere, then we can move on to the implications a ban on YouTube would bring to the global society. If this popular form of communication and discourse is banned in Turkey, Turks are subsequently banned from participating in the digital public sphere. As the newspaper articles, comments, and my own experience living in Turkey during the time of the ban show, Turks did in fact discover ways to circumvent the ban and remain a part of the digital public sphere by use of proxy sites. The prevalence of proxy sites shows the importance that Turks put on accessing this digital public sphere. The proxy sites also bring up the question of control, and perhaps the lack of control the nation-state of Turkey actually has over its citizens' use or lack of use of YouTube and other digital devices. The last question I'd like to bring up is, if new media is just another Western colonized practice that assumes democracy must be in place and freedom of internet access is of grave importance. Robert McChesney would ask us to question the global media system to see if it is just a form of Western and now multinational imperialism. Should the capitalistic and profit motives behind this new digital public sphere be further evaluated and analyzed in terms of imperialism? The importance of new media in contemporary public spheres is therefore paramount. Be it called a digital public sphere or Manuel Castell's network society, the world now finds itself living in a period where new communication technologies and new software has transformed our communication patterns and allowed for the public sphere to reach beyond the confines of the nation state. And here I'd like to conclude with just bringing this issue and applying these questions to the Arab Spring and the fact that in many of these revolutions, we had increased usage of these new social medias. You've probably heard the term the Twitter revolution applied in regards to the Arab Spring. But I would also ask that we think about the counter-revolutions that the nation states and their state governments actually applied to the uses of these new medias, and in which cases were they actually able to triumph the state governments, and in which cases was the counter-revolution of the states taking control of these new media and having trials for those who were blogging and who were using these mediums actually detrimental to the people who were protesting.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation on the idea of this digital public sphere, how that supersedes the various nations interacting with each other, and then how citizens respond. But there seems to be, if I'm misunderstanding it, please correct me, the citizens' perception of Turkey's role and the relationship with the EU, etc., that those reflexes, those comments seem to come from this, what you call the Orientalist kind of understanding discussion of the issue. So, but at the same time, they're part of this digital public sphere. How do you reconcile those? This digital public sphere is not necessarily all global in some ways. How do you see that relationship?
Yes, and if we go back to the original, or one of the primary definitions of a public sphere, the Habermasian, Jürgen Habermas idea of the critical rational discourse, which is allowed in a public sphere, I think that also has to be applied in this new digital public sphere. To what extent is the discourse rational? To what extent is it just stereotypes being performed and programmed in a new medium? What conversations are coming up? I think what would be a very interesting next step would be actually analyzing this topic from just a Turkish newspaper perspective, using just comment streams from Turkish language newspapers to see more of the Turkish citizen response. Since this was English versions of the Turkish newspapers, and one of the backfalls and the problems and limitations with critical discourse analysis is the anonymity of the respondent who is making the comment. You can pick out through some of the wording if someone's from Western Europe, if they're actually putting it in to the comment itself, but there's no way of actually tracking who is specifically commenting on each issue. So I think it would be interesting to do this same critical discourse analysis on the Turkish versions of these two internet newspapers.
That was going to be my next question. Did you see a difference? Did you get a chance to look at sort of the discussions taking place on this in Turkish? So you haven't really...
Just from what discussions were playing out while I was there, just in informal conversations. It wasn't by any means an ethnographic account, but just in living there. I was in Izmir at the time and talking to, I was living with a Turkish host family, so talking to my Turkish host family, talking to friends, seeing their take on the issue, seeing what proxy sites they were using. But in fact, I would like to go back and utilize just the Turkish newspapers and apply these same questions, because I think you could narrow down who the comments were by analyzing the Turkish.
I'd like to open it for questions. Yes.
Yunus Sönmez from Johns Hopkins Studies. My first question is about the, maybe you may have heard this, maybe not, but the Prime Minister himself declared that he is watching YouTube by proxy sites. So can you a little bit touch on this issue? The second one, we know Benedict Anderson has Imagine Communities and Nations thing. Can you redescribe the issue, considering this Anderson's theory? Is it possible?
Yes. I think actually that's a great point to bring up, because Anderson looked at print media in his book. He really focused on Gutenberg and the invention of the printing press and allowing for the vernacular language to come up. So his book really was focused on evaluating this new communication technology and how it really transformed the political arena. And I think we're seeing this happening with this new wave of new communication technologies. We're seeing this transnational conversation emerging, and I do believe there are a lot of stereotypes out there, but there's also a rational critical debate going on, and you're seeing this in how governments respond. Of course, the ban was lifted, and I think you have to think of that as a response to the idea that there were proxy sites being used everywhere, and this was also it was a negative PR move as far as where Turkey was put in categories. It was being put in categories of countries that were having some of the most restrictive internet and social media, policies. So I think you're seeing a reaction from the Turkish government. You're seeing, well, we're not able to contain this. It's still being used, and what is the effect of it being used in kind of an international relations perspective? But I think the idea of Benedict Anderson's approach to looking at a new form of communication technology and how that does in fact change the political arena, I think that can be applied to new media, and I think that's very interesting to apply that idea of tracking this new media. And I'm not trying to make it a deterministic, this was the new media that created the revolutions. By no means do I believe that's the case, but I do believe that this medium did help morph the speed in which the Arab Spring was able to take place. And I think that's something that really does need to be looked at.
Do we know why the ban was lifted eventually? Was it because of the comments that put pressure on the government?
There was not a reaction that stated why the ban was lifted that I could find, but I think you can imply that it wasn't working, it wasn't successful, and again, the PR that it was attributing was more harm than the good that banning this medium would do.
Hi, FF7 of American University. I have a two-part question, if you don't mind. The first one is about the two main media streams you used, Hürriyet and Zaman. Did you see any difference between the comments from these newspapers, because they kind of represent it too? Yeah.
Right. In a previous paper, I looked at the political economy of these two newspapers, and they do have very different funding streams, very different audiences, much like the main newspapers here in the United States. And we do see a phenomenon where people go to the sources that reiterate their ideological backgrounds. So if you're going to a certain ideological background, you might be reading Today's Zaman, on the other side, the Hürriyet.
So did you see some difference in?
The overwhelming majority was anti-ban. Again, I only saw 6 distinct comments that were pro-ban, and at this moment I couldn't tell you whether they were all from one or the other, but I believe it was just mixed between the two. But the overwhelming response were these 3 macro structures that came up in both newspapers.
The second question I have is about calling the digital media as a public sphere, because you also mentioned Habermasian public sphere. So that Habermasian public sphere understanding is not only critical or rational, but it also talks about equal access and inviting everyone. So there's this inclusive understanding too. So given that, and given what we talk about digital divide and everything, or government's regulatory role on the internet, if you will, can we really talk about a digital public sphere?
I think we can. I think when we go back and look at Habermas's public sphere, it wasn't completely open to everyone. It really was this new bourgeois intellectual class that came together in the coffee houses. There was also a gender divide at that time in that society. It was going to be bourgeois white males that could come together in this coffee house setting and have this type of critical rational discourse. And I think that's the same thing we're seeing with the digital divide. There is a certain class of people that are able to access the internet and able to go on and create these comments and be a part of this conversation. I think the Kantian idea of a global cosmopolitan society where everyone is in fact a member, I do bring this up in the paper. In fact, I don't believe that's ever truly possible. There's always going to be people that are able to access depending on geographical location, times in history, and it's going to be based on socioeconomics. It's going to be based on access, and I don't believe there will ever be a utopian cosmopolitan society as Kant envisioned, unfortunately, but I do believe we can still analyze these terms and utilize and call it a digital public sphere.
How about the discussion? You looked at some of these articles are purely online. Some of them are translations of Turkish articles, etc. I assume. Did you look at this discussion taking place in other parts of the digital public sphere, such as Facebook, Twitter, etc.? There you would probably find more hardcore supporters of the lifting of the ban against the ban.
I think that brings up a very good technical question on how to successfully do critical discourse analysis on new media. And one of the reasons why I chose YouTube to focus on, well, I'm sorry, not YouTube videos, but internet articles, is there you still have to apply standards of the human subjects testing, because you are looking, I did actually have to go through that process because I was looking at actual human subjects that were posting on YouTube. What allowed it to be easier to get the clearance for that is that it's anonymous on YouTube. It's not a Facebook friend. And also Facebook becomes very hard to use primary sources because you do have to have a direct friendship with someone. So it, in some ways, takes away the anonymity of looking at different primary sources and saying, well, I just did a sample of the sources that came up when I, put in a search for the ban on YouTube. Whereas with Facebook, you would actually have to be looking at your own friend list, and that creates problems with actually applying this particular methodology. So I haven't been able to utilize Facebook in any of my primary source research for that reason.
During the Arab Revolution discussions, we saw that once, especially Egyptian Revolution, became mobilized partly through Facebook and Twitter and all that, and we discussed this earlier, private, that you don't think that obviously the social media engineered this, but it helped facilitate it, etc. You had the conditions on the ground. But as we moved to other revolutions throughout the region, once people thought that this was actually, having a domino effect, and it was a big sort of structural change, we started standardizing almost the countries. Okay, what's next? Bahrain, Syria, and all these countries became as if essentially the same kind of venues for the same kind of revolutions to take place. Do you think social media in some ways creates that flattening and reductionist kind of perception about what that revolution is? We almost discussions were like Egypt, Libya, Syria, Bahrain, Tunisia, all these are almost the same at a certain level, and people expect the same kind of results, same kind of things to happen. Do you think social media may have had a role in that, in the sense that you don't really know so much about Libya, but you do know there is something going on against the government? So, and similar arguments were made about Turkey too, with respect to Kurdish issue. When are we going to have a Kurdish spring? So, do you feel that creates this maybe in the negative sense reductionist approach, or in the positive sense, even in places it wasn't possible, it became possible? Perhaps you could maybe think about it.
Yeah, I think just the label of Twitter revolution that became a very popular soundbite in a lot of Western media, it did homogenize the idea, and it did put the emphasis on the revolution on this social media medium instead of giving credit to the people that were out demonstrating. Yes, it was used to create, many examples can be seen where someone would have a Facebook page and they would put on their status, where the protests would be located, and they would try to mobilize groups to come at that time. But it was the person that was still creating the messages and creating the emphasis and moving beyond just a social media conversation. So in many ways, scholars are saying, well, does social media at times create kind of a lethargic way of being an activist? In some ways, you might friend or like the protest, but you yourself aren't going to go out and act. But it was the people that went out with their physical bodies and went to protest that I think really does need to be focused on. And this homogenization of saying that it's a Twitter revolution or it's based on YouTube, I do think creates an homogenizing entity that isn't giving credit to the people that are protesting. And it's also not, in order to evaluate a nuanced version of what's taking place in each country, you have to look at the counter-revolution that I brought up, and how is the state reacting to those users who are blogging, who are using Facebook, who are using Twitter. In some cases, the anonymity the veil is lifted, and these people were prosecuted, imprisoned, because of their use of the social media. So, and then, for example, Syria shut down social media, and then analysts are saying that they were able to create a way to monitor these social medias, and then they were lifting bans and creating more access, but having the intelligence to deal with users on these social mediums. So I think there is this push and pull between users, anonymity, new medium, and then the state reappropriating how they're evaluating these social mediums and how they're prosecuting people who are using them. So there is this push and pull. It's not a utopian system that's allowing just this unmitigated use of protesting without people finding out who is doing the protesting. So I think those have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, country-by-country basis.
Could I ask you to follow up on that and continue that process of examining what's happening, what is the impact of social media and the counter-revolution, if you will, on the course of public discourse, on the content of the conversation. In Egypt, with the revolution, where that conversation seems to have migrated to more traditional spheres and channels, or in Turkey, the impact on the democratization, the constitution reform conversation, identity questions, Kurdish and other issues that come in. What's the impact after social media has played this accelerant role, and it has precipitated a reaction of one kind or another? What then happens to the substance, the content, the nature of the discourse?